Hello students and welcome to today's lesson, What's the Language of the Future by Henry Hitchings. This is the second part of the lesson and the lesson is being presented by Dr. P.V. Geeta Lakshmi Patnaik from BJ Government Degree College, Narayanguda, Hyderabad. So students, if you remember, we have already discussed the first part of the lesson in the previous class. So today we will be dealing with the second part of the lesson. But before we do that, let us have a very quick recap of the previous lesson. What's the Language of the Future is an excerpt from Henry Hitchings' book, The Language Wars, A History of Proper English, published in 2011. It is concerned with the rapid and widespread growth of the English language as the lingua franca of the world. According to Hitchings, the adoption of English is a symptom of the global phenomenon of urbanization along with the growth of the middle class. English is dominant in the areas of shipping, diplomacy, computing, medicine, and education. Hitchings goes on to list the factors that helped the spread of English in the past, which are British colonialism, industrial revolution, American domination, technological advancements of the 20th century, and two other very important factors, which are the exportation of English as second language and the growth of English mass media. He goes on to say that English is the world's auxiliary tongue. And this is because it has there are 500 million second language speakers, which is a number that is more than the number of native speakers. He also makes a reference to the English fever that has afflicted many countries across the world. English fever can be defined as the preoccupation or obsession with learning or promoting the learning of the English language. Hitchings cites the example of Korea to show the craze for English and the lengths to which people will go in order to learn the language. So that is the recap of our previous class. So now students, let us move on to today's lesson, the part of the lesson that has been selected for today. So I shall read out the next paragraph in the lesson. What's the language of the future? There are challenges to the position of English as the dominant world language in the 21st century. The main ones seem likely to come from Spanish and Mandarin Chinese. Both have more first language users than English, but at present, neither is much used as a lingua franca. The majority of speakers of Mandarin Chinese live in one country, and excepting Spain, most Spanish speakers are in the Americas. So as we have seen, in the first part of the lesson that we read in the last class, we have seen how Hitchings talks about the factors that helped the spread of English in the past, and also maybe the reasons for the English fever in the present. He expands on these reasons in this part of the lesson also, and he also talks about the challenges that the language is likely to face in the near future. So coming to this paragraph in particular, what is it that Hitchings is saying? He says that there are challenges to the position of English as the dominant world language in the 21st century. And it seems likely, he says, that the main challenges may come from Spanish and Mandarin Chinese. And he goes on to tell us that these languages have an advantage as well as a disadvantage. So what is the advantage? The advantage is that both have more first language users than English language. But then the disadvantage is that at present, neither is much used as a lingua franca. And neither Spanish nor Mandarin Chinese is used as a lingua franca. And the reason for this is that the majority of speakers of Mandarin Chinese live in one country, and that is mainland China. And most Spanish speakers, except for Spain, they're only there in the Americas. So like in Mexico and Mexico in North America and countries in South America. So, and maybe a few countries in Central America. But then the point is that other than these countries, the Spanish language is not spoken elsewhere. And similarly, Mandarin Chinese is not spoken outside mainland China. So I have this picture for these, a couple of pictures for you students. You can see how Spanish and Mandarin Chinese seem likely to pose challenges to pose a challenge to the position of English as the dominant world language. But then Hitchings is quick to undercut his argument, and he talks about how even though both these languages have more number of first language users than English, they have the disadvantage that neither of them is used as a lingua franca. And the reason is that, the majority of speakers of Mandarin Chinese live in only China, and except for Spain, most Spanish speakers are in the Americas. So this then is one challenge that he talks about, and then of course quickly abandons it. Let us move on to the next paragraph. What's the language of the future? The next paragraph. The main challenges to English may come from within. There is a long history of people using the language for anti-English ends, of creative artists and political figures asserting in English their distance from Englishness or Britishness or Americanness. For instance, many writers whose first language has not been English have infused their English writing with foreign flavors. This has enabled them to parade their heritage while working in a medium that has made it possible for them to reach a wide audience. So this is very important, students. What has happened is that it is not only an external challenge that English may have to face. There is an internal challenge, Hitchings says. And what is that internal challenge? He talks about a very long history of people using the language for anti-English ends. And who are these people? These people are creative artists and political figures who actually use the language to assert their distance from Englishness or Britishness or Americanness. What do? They actually use the English language, they write in this language, and they propagate their ideas all around the world while making use of a medium which has a wide audience. So Hitchings says, for instance, many writers whose first language has not been English have infused their English writing with foreign flavors. And so what has this done? This has given them the advantage of being able to parade their heritage while working in a language which gives to them a very wide audience. So I have a few examples for your students. Here are non-native writers of English literature. This is Chinua Achebe, who has written a novel called Things Fall Apart, which speaks about the way British colonialism has destroyed the African heritage, culture and heritage. And this is Kazuo Ishiguro from Japan, who settled in the UK, and he went on to win the Nobel Prize in the English literature, in literature, sorry. And then this is V.S. Naipaul, an Indian who settled in Trinidad, then Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy, and Chimamanda Adichie. So these are all writers, non-native writers of English literature who achieved fame and popularity, who have achieved all sorts of benefits in the worldwide arena of literature, and they have actually made use of their skills in the English language to reach a wide audience. So these are examples of writers who have used the English language to assert their distance from Englishness or Britishness or Americanness, and they have been able to parade their heritage while working in the English language. So let us move on to the next passage. And what does Hitchings say? Two challenges stand out. One of them is India. English is important to its English is important to its global ambitions. The language's roots are colonial, but English connects Indians less to the past than to the future. Already the language is used by more people in India than in any other country, the United States included. Meanwhile, in China, the number of students learning the language is increasing rapidly. The entrepreneur Li Yang has developed Crazy English, an unorthodox teaching method. It involves a lot of shouting. This, Li explains, is the way for Chinese to activate their international muscles. His agenda is patriotic. One of Li's slogans is, I quote, "Conquer English to make China strong," unquote. A few dissenting voices suggest that he is encouraging racism, but the enthusiasm for his populist approach is in no doubt. And it is a symptom of China's English fever, the ardent conviction that learning English is the essential skill for surviving in the modern world. So let us just break up this passage into three parts. The first part is about India. As we can see from the overall reading of the passage, Hitchings talks about two important challenges to the position of English as the dominant world language in the 21st century. What is this challenge? Or rather, this is the challenge from within that he's talking about. And what are these two challenges? One of them is India and the other is China. So India is a very important country because it uses English for its global, to promote its global ambitions. And Hitchings is quick to point out that actually the roots of the language in India are colonial. In other words, the language the language was brought to India by British colonialism. But then today, in the present, English connects Indians more to the future than to the past. And that is what he's talking about when he says that English is important to its global ambitions. So a very important point here is that already the language is used by more people in India than in any other country, the United States included. So this is a very important point because more number of people in India are able to use the language. And moving on to the next example, which is the next challenge, which is China. Hitchings points out that the number of students learning the language is increasing rapidly. And he gives an example of the entrepreneur Li Yang, who has developed a very unorthodox teaching method known as crazy English. So what is this method? This is a method which has gained tremendous popularity in China, and it involves a lot of shouting. As Li explains, this is a way for Chinese to activate their international muscles. What is interesting is that he uses this particular teaching method of crazy English, in order to develop an agenda which is supposed to be patriotic. So one of Lee's slogans is "Conquer English to make China strong." It is interesting to note that during the recent Olympics, which were held in China, he was given the task of, his organization was given the task of teaching English to most professionals like doctors, trainers, and other people associated with the games. So he became very, very rich on account of this. And what is interesting is that there are a few dissenting voices in China, within China, which suggests that he's actually encouraging racism. But Hitchings is of the opinion that the enthusiasm for his approach is in no doubt. So he also goes on to say that this is a symptom of China's English fever. Earlier, he had spoken about Korea and the English fever that has gripped people in Korea. And now he talks about China's English fever. And this, students, is his definition of English fever. And the definition is the ardent conviction that learning English is the essential skill for surviving in the modern world. So in India and China are potential sites of challenge to the English language. And we'll see why he says this particular thing. And this is a picture of Li Yang, who is a Chinese entrepreneur. And you can see all the students behind. They're all actually shouting aloud from a given text. And this is a method which emphasizes practicing English orally. And it is described with the slogan, "By shouting out loud, you learn." So as I mentioned earlier, or rather Hitchings mentioned earlier, the other slogan which has gained a lot of popularity is "Conquer English to make China strong." So let us move on to the next passage. The embrace of English in the world's two most populous countries means that the language is changing. Some of the changes are likely to prove disconcerting for its native speakers. The Englishness of English is being diluted. So, more surprisingly, is its American flavor. English's center of gravity is moving. In fact, in the 21st century, the language has many centers. As this continues, native English speakers may find themselves at a disadvantage. Non-native speakers of English often comment that they find conversing with one another easier than sharing talk with native speakers. Already, many people who learn English do so with little or no intention of conversing with its native users. This is an interesting thing that he says. Hitchings says that the fact that English has been embraced by uh, two of the most populous countries in the world means that the language is changing. So, how is it changing? And how are these changes going to affect its native speakers? These are some of the questions that Hitchings addresses within this paragraph. Hitchings says that the Englishness of English is being diluted. And this is also true regarding its American flavor. So if the Englishness of English and its American flavor are being diluted, then what is happening to the English language? How is it changing? We'll see that in the next paragraph, but here, English's center of gravity is moving, he says. In fact, in the 21st century, the language has many centers. And as this continues, many native speakers of English find themselves at a disadvantage. And this is because most non-native speakers of English often comment that it is easier for them to converse with one another than to converse with native speakers. And what is even more disturbing is the fact, for the native speakers, of course, is the fact that many people already learn English with absolutely no intention of conversing with its native users. So the point is that it is not necessary for them to learn the language to speak to native speakers or native users of the language. What is more important is that the fact that it is implied that foreign or non-native speakers learn English with the intention of using it for other purposes than with the intention of conversing with its native users. So this is a very important thing, students, because as we move on to the next passage, we can see how it is a disadvantage to native speakers. But here is an interesting picture that I have for you. So English's center of gravity was first, of course, the UK, and then it was shared with the US. But today, in the 21st century, the center of gravity has changed to many centers. So this is a picture that I created for you. I brought these two pictures and then added this picture just to make it clear how English's center of gravity has now changed to many centers, as Hitchings mentions. Moving on to the next paragraph. At the same time, Hitchings says, native speakers of English tend to assume that their ability in this potent language makes it unimportant to learn other languages. The reality is different. British companies often miss out on export opportunities because of a lack of relevant language skills. Moreover, there is a chance that a command of English will, within 20 or 30 years, be regarded as a basic skill for business, and native speakers of the language will no longer enjoy any competitive advantage. I'll stop here and let us look at the passage once again. Hitchings talks about how native speakers of English generally have this assumption that their ability in this very potent language that is English makes it unnecessary for them to learn other languages. In fact, it is a kind of arrogance. But then Hitchings is quick to point out that the reality is different. While the whole world is actually learning the English language, native speakers of English don't bother to learn other languages. Generally, this is a general assumption that they don't actually. This is a generalization that they don't usually try to learn other languages. But then, as Hitchings says, British companies often miss out on export opportunities because of a lack of relevant language skills. This is one disadvantage or loss that the native speakers of English face. The other is that very soon, the other disadvantage is that very soon there's going to be a chance that the command of English will be regarded as a basic skill for business. And this is a skill that, this is one advantage that native speakers had until now. But if and when others, non-native speakers, have a command of the language, then what is going to happen? native speakers of the language will no longer enjoy any competitive advantage. So very soon this is going to happen, he says. So in the near future, the world is going to witness a very major change, and that is that most non-native speakers of English will have a command of English which may be as good as the native users. And once this is regarded as a basic skill for business, then naturally native speakers of the language will not be able to enjoy any kind of advantage. Moving on to the next paragraph, he says, when polled in 2005, more than 80% of people in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden claimed to be able to speak English. The figure was around 60% in Finland, 50% in Germany, 30% in France and Italy, and 20% in Spain and Turkey. These figures can safely be assumed to have increased. They come from a study published in 2006 by the British Council, an organization set up in 1934 and today operating as an international cultural relations body in more than 100 countries. So in order to make it easy for you to remember, students, here is a table. According to a study which was published in 2006 by the British Council, these are the countries, and on this side, and this is the percentage of people who are able to speak English. In 2006, more than 80% of people in Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden claim to be able to speak the language. 60% in Finland, 50% in Germany, 30% in France and Italy, and 20% in Spain and Turkey. And Hitchings says that this is definitely, there's definitely going to be an increase in this number. So what does this talk about? What does this imply for the native speakers of the language? This is a disadvantage because if all these people were able to speak the language in 2006, and if this number has increased in the present, then isn't it going to be a disadvantage for native user students? Definitely, it's going to be a disadvantage. And that is because, as we have seen in the previous paragraph, they will definitely lose out on any kind of advantage or a competitive advantage that they have been used to all along. And so, moving on to the next passage. In 1989, its Director General, that is the Director General of the British Council, Sir Richard Francis, stated that Britain's real black gold is not North Sea oil, but the English language. That view is often played down, but the role of the British Council in promoting British English ties in with British corporate interests. Large companies such as British Petroleum, now BP Amoco, have worked with the British Council, funding educational schemes to encourage foreign nationals to learn English. This is not exactly an act of altruism. As Robert Phillipson punctually says, English for business is business for English. But while English is being pushed, it is also being pulled. It is the language more than any other that people want to learn. Or I should maybe repeat it. But while English is being pushed, it is also being pulled. It is the language more than any other that people want to learn. So this passage is very important, students, because Hitchings is making a couple of very, very important, very significant statements here. In 1989, the Director General of the British Council, Sir Richard Francis, stated that, I quote, Britain's real black gold is not North Sea oil, but the English language, unquote. This is a very important statement. Hitchings goes on to say that this view is often played down. What he's trying to say is that generally authorities in England don't emphasize this point that it is the English language which is its real capital, its real treasure. So why is this done? Because the role of the British Council in promoting British English, according to Hitchings, has a very close relationship with the British corporate interests. And why is this so? He quotes the example of large companies such as British Petroleum, which have worked with the British Council and which have funded educational schemes to encourage foreign nationals to learn English. This is done with a very specific purpose. If you remember, students, earlier, while we were talking, we were discussing how there are many factors which have played a major role in in the spread of English as a world language. Hitchings spoke about Arabic-speaking countries, and he spoke about how in the United Arab Emirates, English is the language of science and technology. So if you remember, students, he had spoken about how excellent textbooks and other educational resources are readily available in English, and that is why it has become a very major. It has become one of the most important languages in Arab-speaking countries. And there, if I remember, he says that the propagation of English is an industry, not a happy accident. So this is a very important statement, and it ties in with this particular passage where he talks about how it's not exactly an act of altruism. What is he talking about? Let us go back here. The role of the British Council in promoting British English ties in with British corporate interests. This is a very, very important point. And the example that he gives is of companies such as British Petroleum, which have worked with British Council and which have spent a lot of money on educational schemes to encourage other countries or people of other countries to learn English. And it is not an act of altruism, says Hitchings. Altruism is selflessness. And he also quotes Robert Phillipson, who is a professor emeritus and who actually is a very strong advocate of multilingual education and linguistic rights. And Robert Phillipson, I have this picture of him. He has written a book called Linguistic Imperialism, in which he has written, this line that is, English for business is business for English. So what is it that Hitchings is talking about here? Hitchings says that there is a very, very real agenda behind the promotion of propagation of English as the world language all across across various countries of the world. And what is this agenda? The agenda, in not many words, is English for business, and this is business for English. Why is it so? The United States, along with England or Great Britain, is actually promoting the language in order to promote their own corporate interests. It is in their interests, in their business interests, if people all over the world learn the language and they use the language for business purposes. So this is a very important point, students. I want you to remember it. And let us now move to the last. Before we move to the last paragraph, take a look at this picture. So here is this stick man pushing something, and here is another man pulling something. So this is the status of English in the 21st century, according to Henry Hitchings. As he says, but while English is being pushed, it is also being pulled. It is the language more than any other that people want to learn. So who is pushing the language? English is being pushed by organizations like the British Council, and the people, the corporates which are behind this and who are funding it are all pushing the language. It is also being pulled, he says, by the non-native speakers and authorities of different countries, as this is definitely the language that they want to learn. So English in the 21st century is being pushed and pulled, but ultimately the language is being used for various purposes, and it has become the lingua franca of the world. But there is a very important statement that Hitchings makes. The consequences are complex, he says. Some, it would seem, are not as intended. Even as vast amounts are spent on spreading British English, the reality is that English is taking on more and more local color in the different places where it is used. Accordingly, while the number of languages in the world is diminishing, the number of Englishes is increasing. So pay a lot of attention to this paragraph, students, because here is something that Hitchings is emphasizing. He's emphasizing a very, very important point. And what is that? The consequences of the pushing or pulling of the language worldwide are complex, he says. Some of these complexes are not as intended. So what are the intended consequences? Actually, the British Council and other organizations are, working with an agenda where they would want to promote their their interests, their business interests. But what is happening is that even though very vast amounts are spent on spreading British English as such, the reality is that the language is actually taking on more and more local color in the various places where it is used. For example, the English language used in India is very different from the kind of language which is used in China, and very different from the language which is used in Africa. And so we can see how the number of Englishes is increasing. To quote Hitchings, while the number of languages in the world is diminishing, the number of Englishes is increasing. So statistics have pointed out that they have actually proved that the number of languages in the world is diminishing. Every day, many languages are dying a natural death. But then the number of Englishes is increasing, says Hitchings. So what is happening is that even though these native users of the language are promoting or propagating the language for their own interests, of course, what is happening is that the language is changing. The language has begun to take on local color in the different countries where it is being used, and therefore the number of Englishes is increasing. So take a look at this picture and see how English has moved from one English to different Englishes. So it is the lingua franca of the world, that is true. But then, of course, it has various versions of the language. The lingua franca, that is English, is now Englishes actually. So you have Hinglish in India, Chinglish in China, Spanglish, Black English, Wenglish, Franglish, etc., etc. So students, what is it that the writer Henry Hitchings is saying? He is actually talking about the factors that help the spread of English in the past, the reasons for the English fever in the present, and the challenges that the language is likely to face in the near future. So before we come to the end of the lesson, here is a quick test for you. Um, don't worry, it is very simple. All you have to do is you have to complete the following statements with the appropriate word. So you have 5 statements here, students, and take a look at them. I shall read out the statements with their options. All you have to do is identify the correct answer. The first statement: Spanish and dash have more first language users than English. Spanish and dash, the other language, have more first language users than English. And the options are A, German, B, French, C, Japanese, and D, Mandarin Chinese. The second statement is English is used by more people in dash than in any other country in the world, the United States included. The options are India, A, India, B, China, C, England, and D, Canada. The third statement is, according to Henry Hitchings, the Englishness of English is being dash. The options are A, damaged, B, enhanced, C, diluted, D, none of the above. The fourth statement is, Sir Richard Francis, the Director General of the British Council, stated that, I quote, Britain's real gold is not North Sea oil, but the dash language, unquote. The options are A, English, B, Welsh, C, Scottish, and D, Irish. The last statement is, students, Hitchings points out that while the number of languages in the world is diminishing, the number of Englishes is dash. The options: A, decreasing, B, increasing, C, the same, D, none of the above. So take a minute, students, and just note down the answers to these questions that are asked here. Okay, so here are the answers. Spanish and Mandarin Chinese have more first language users than English. English is used by more people in India than in any other country in the world, the United States included. According to Henry Hitchings, the Englishness of English is being diluted. Sir Richard Francis, the Director General of the British Council, stated that, I quote, Britain's real gold is not North Sea oil, but the dash language, which is English language. Hitchings points out that while the number of languages in the world is diminishing, the number of Englishes is increasing. So what are the answers, students? Mandarin Chinese, India, diluted, English, and increasing. Did you get them right? I'm sure you must have. So now, the final part of the lesson. These are the important points that you're supposed to remember. According to Hitchings, English faces many challenges to its position as the dominant world language in the 21st century. Once again, English faces many challenges to its position as the dominant world language in the 21st century. Second, Spanish and Mandarin Chinese may appear to pose a challenge to English as they have more first language speakers than English. However, neither is much used as a lingua franca as their speakers are either restricted to only a few countries as in Spanish language or only one country as in Mandarin Chinese. The main challenge to English is from within, as many creative artists and political figures have used the language to assert their distance from Englishness or Americanness while reaching out to a wide audience. Hitchings states that two countries, that is India and China, have emerged as potential sites of challenge to the English language. India is a challenge because its global ambitions are linked to the English language and it already has more users of the language than the USA. The other challenge is from China, which has been afflicted with English fever and is convinced that learning English is the essential skill for survival in the modern world. The results of the two most populous countries adopting the English language are as follows. A. The Englishness of the language is being diluted and the center of gravity has moved so that it has many centers. B. Non-native speakers find conversing with one another easier than with native speakers. C. This is a disadvantage for native speakers as many people who learn English have no intention of conversing with them. Next, native speakers generally know only English as they assume that their ability in English is sufficient. However, as Hitchings points out, they have to face the following disadvantages, which are A, the export opportunities are missed out due to lack of relevant skills in other languages. B, English will soon become a basic skill for business, leading to the loss of any competitive advantage for native speakers. Moving on, a study published by the British Council in 2006 shows that a large number of people in other countries too have claimed that they are able to speak English, and the number must have increased in the present. British companies have been collaborating with the British Council to promote the English language in other countries for business reasons. However, as Hitchings points out, English is not only being pushed, it is also being pulled, as it is the language that people all over the world want to learn. This has other consequences which are as follows. A. English is taking on more and more local flavor wherever it is being used. B. As the number of languages in the world is diminishing, the number of Englishes is increasing. Finally, students, the lesson presents a very clear and lucid account of the debates that shape the English language and offers an insight into the state of the language today and its likely future. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson, students. That is all for today. Have a good day.